Hi everyone, Ashley here and welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be showcasing how to use stencils and Distress Oxide ink blending along with water to create these cool effects for a background. I actually have never seen anyone else do the technique quite like this, so I'm hoping that this will inspire some of you to go and try it yourselves. So to start with the background, I'm going to be blending 3 colors of Distress Oxide inks. I've got Lucky Clover as the darkest one, Cracked Pistachio as the middle, and Shabby Shudders as the light. I'm blending onto Strathmore Bristol Smooth cardstock here. This is a really nice cardstock for ink blending because it's really smooth and really thick, so you can really pool a lot of ink onto it without the paper pilling or tearing. I'm using the Picket Studios life-changing blender brushes here because I find this is just a nice even way to add ink onto the paper. I'm starting with the darkest one, which is the Lucky Clover, and then moving on to the middle, which again is the Cracked Pistachio, and just going back and forth to blend them together. Finally, I'm adding the light. So this is the effect here. You can see the light, dark, and medium colors all blended together. The next step is to add the water through the stencil. And for this card, I wanted it to have a fun, nature kind of vibe. So I'm using one of these stencils that came in a pack of 3 from Honeybee Stamps, and the pack is called Fall Showers. And I really love this nice leafy pattern. I'm taping the piece of paper onto the back of the stencil, and this tape will be on the back of the paper, so you don't have to worry about having to ink over it or anything. So I just added the tape on all 4 sides there, and that keeps the paper nicely in place. Then I'm just grabbing a piece of paper towel off camera here, which will be used as part of the technique, which you'll see in just a minute. I've got my blender brush, and I just sprayed a little bit of water using my Tim Holtz Distress sprayer. That is basically just a spray bottle that has water in it, so you can use any spray bottle. And as you can see, I just dabbed it onto the brush and then dabbed the excess off onto the paper towel to make sure that it's not too watery. You can see on the paper towel there that some of the ink comes off from when I was ink blending. And this is totally fine. In fact, I think this actually adds to the effect, because not only do you get the water going through the stencil, but you also get a little bit of the ink. So what I do now is I spray the water onto the paper towel and then blend the brush into that to pick up some of the water. I found that this was a really good way to do it because often I found that putting the water directly onto the brush caused the brush to be a little too watery. And if it's too watery, then it's going to kind of blend underneath the stencil and you're not going to get the clean lines from the stencil. So by putting the water onto the paper towel, a little bit less water goes onto the brush and it dilutes it down a little bit. This way, your brush is pretty much like the perfect amount of wet to get the pattern onto the stencil, but also not overdo it. So I kept doing that where I'd spray a little bit of water onto the paper towel, then blend the brush into the water on the paper towel, and then take the brush to the piece. And I just blended back and forth through the stencil to make sure that I was covering all the areas. And you can see from time to time I checked to make sure that I was getting it right. So now this is the best part. Sorry for the sun shadows there, but I'm going to bring the piece a little bit closer to the camera now so that you can see the beautiful pattern that you get. The water acts to lift a bit of the ink off, so you get the nice light colors coming through in the pattern. And again, I think having a little bit of the ink left on the brush actually helped because it added a little bit of nice light green. I really love how that turned out. To turn this background into a card, I'm using this cover die from Avery Elle called Horizontal Stripes. I find that this die is really handy for just putting together any sort of quick card that you need because it kind of takes center stage on the card, and you'll see what I mean when you see the card come together. You don't really have to do much. You just have to have some sort of background, put this on top, and then maybe put some sort of image or sentiment in the center, and then you've got your card. So what this die does is it cuts out this nice stripy pattern, as well as a hole in the center if you put that circle die into it. So otherwise it wouldn't cut out a hole in the center. So if you do want to cut out, you do have to lay that interior circle die into there. I'm just using some purple tape to do that, and I like to use this type of tape to hold dies in place often when I'm putting them through my Big Shot, because it holds things in place nicely without sticking too much. I'm then putting the top cutting plate onto the sandwich there to complete it, and then I can run it through my Big Shot machine. Once it's run through the machine, you'll see that it comes out on the other side all cut out, and it creates this really nice horizontal striped piece. And you can just use your fingers to get out all those little excess pieces in the middle. So this is how it looks in the end. I decided that I wanted to turn this into a shaker card with the leafy stenciled background in the back and this striped piece on top. In order to do that, I knew I needed to cut out some foam to go behind it and create the dimension needed for the sequins. So I just used the same die and I ran it through my Big Shot machine twice to create 2 foam pieces. So I used Fun Foam, which comes in full sheets, and I just cut it down to size in order to make these foam pieces. However, I wanted the sequins in the shaker to be able to move throughout the whole card piece and not be restricted to certain parts of the stripes. So in order to do that, I knew I had to cut those stripes away from this cutout piece. So I'm just using my scissors here to cut away those stripes from the foam piece. And this will allow the foam to just become one big empty rectangle. And the idea is that this is the rectangle that will then hold the sequins in the shaker. And I'm going to do that for both foam pieces because I'm going to lay them over one another to create enough dimension. At first I was worried that this would be wasteful, but then I ended up keeping all those leftover stripes, and I'm going to use them on other projects when I need small, thin pieces of foam, so it actually worked out well. I then knew that I didn't want this foam rectangle to be exactly the same size as the top piece because I didn't want you to be able to see it poking out of the sides. So I cut it down from the inside as well as from the outside, just using my scissors here. So I'm just cutting off a thin strip from the inside, and I'll actually go all the way around the rectangle to cut out the thin strip from every side. And I'll do that for both foam squares so that you end up having the same piece twice, and you can again lay them together. So like I said, I'm also cutting the outside edge so that you don't see it poking out of the outside of the top piece. You don't have to worry about this being clean because this is not actually something that will be seen on your card. It's going to be completely hidden by that top striped piece. So the next stage is to place a piece of acetate onto this card front with all the stripes. So I'm just adding a bit of Ranger Multi-Medium Matte, which is a really nice sticky adhesive, to all of the parts of this stripy piece. And then I'm going to lay on my piece of acetate, which is just a piece of clear plastic basically. And I'm going to press down to make sure that it really sticks to that piece. And then you have that clear window that you can use to look into the shaker. I guess I cut the acetate piece a little bit too big, but that's fine. I'm just using my scissors here to trim off the extra. And that way it's nice and clean. I then need to place these foam rectangles along the inner edges of this front piece to create the pocket for where the sequins will go as part of the shaker. To do this, I'm using some double-sided tape, and I'm just going to be placing it on both sides of this foam. That way I can place the foam down onto the card front and then place the other piece of foam onto it and allow it to sort of double stack. Okay, so now I have both pieces of foam rectangle placed onto that front piece, creating a nice 3D pocket for the sequins to fit in. So now it's time to add all my sequins to my card. I'm adding a whole bunch of sequins here because I wanted it to be really full so that there's a lot of sequins taking up space in the card. I'm using a nice assortment of just a whole bunch of the sequins that I had on hand, and I'm trying to stick to sort of more green, blue, and yellow colors along with some clear and iridescent for the extra sparkle. And this is just in keeping with the theme of sort of the naturey background that I had made. So I'm just adding the sequins to the card front and making sure not to pile them too high, or else I find that it sort of squishes against the acetate and makes it harder to adhere your card front onto the back. I skipped ahead a little bit now so you can see the big pile of sequins that we've got going. I added a lot of different types. And now I'm just adding a couple little seed beads too. And when I'm making big shakers like this, I really like to add a few seed beads in to the mix. I find that they add a fun noise. That probably sounds really weird, but they really sound funky when you shake the card, almost like sand being shaken. And they're just a little bit different and fun. So now I'm ready to carefully place my card front onto the card base. I'm super careful doing this because, of course, I want to make sure that the card front is entirely covering the card base and is taped down on all sides. I did use some double-sided tape for this again. And of course, I want to make sure that it's taped down on all sides so that none of those sequins come flying out when you test it. It's always sort of like the moment of truth when you test a shaker. It's like, did I get every side? So there you go. I'm now testing it, and luckily I did a good job and none of the sequins are flying out. So I usually end up doing this for about 30 seconds to a minute, just sitting there shaking the card because I find it so fun. Something about sparkly things. I don't know what it is. I'm a bit of a magpie, I guess. So the card front is done, and now it's time to add the stamped images. For this card, I decided to use this koala image from the Simon Says Stamp Koalaty Friends stamp set. It was actually a free add-on from one of my Simon Says Stamp orders from a while ago now, and I just hadn't really gotten around to using it yet. So I decided that this card might be the perfect opportunity because it's a slightly larger image, so it will definitely take up that center area nicely. And I thought that the koala image just went along really nicely with that more naturey stencil that I had used for the background. So I'm stamping it onto some Neenah Solar White cardstock with Gina K Amalgam ink using my mini Misty tool. And next I'm going to color it in with Copic markers. I'm using some brown shades here to color in the koala. I actually had to Google a koala to make sure that I knew what colors it was supposed to be. Because I don't think I've ever actually seen a koala in real life unless it was at a zoo, which would have been a long time ago. Although it would be fun to live in a climate that had real koalas because they do seem very cute. So I'm just going to speed up the coloring process here. So feel free to sit back, relax, and enjoy the coloring. Or if you're not into this sort of thing, just feel free to skip ahead in the video. Okay, so that is the coloring done. Off camera, I went ahead and fussy cut out that koala so that I can add him to my card front here. And I'm doing that just using a bit of double-sided tape so that he sticks nicely to the adhesive without any of the glue sort of pushing out and causing smudges. So I've got the adhesive onto him, and I'm just placing him across that center circle so that it looks like he's just hanging from the branch out of the side of the card. This way he also takes up that center space nicely, so it's not so empty. So I'm just pressing down to make sure he's nicely adhered. And for the last step, I'm just going to add the sentiment. For this, I actually ink blended some Shabby Shutter's Distress ink onto a piece of scrap paper, and then used black ink to stamp the sentiment over top. And for the sentiment, I just used one that came in that same stamp set, and it says, "This qualifies as a hug." I love these punny sentiments. They're always so cute. And I used that ink color because I figured it would match nicely with the card. I went through a whole bunch of other green papers I have, and none of them just really seemed to work. So this is always a nice option if that happens to you as well. Then after this, I just stuck the whole thing down onto a white card base, and voila, that is the finished card. So thank you so much for watching this video. I'm really glad that this technique turned out well. I wasn't really sure what would happen or how it would turn out, but I hope that this inspires some of you to try this technique on your cards. I think this is a really nice way to add a pattern to your distress inked backgrounds without it being too overpowering. So there you can see how the pattern looks with the leaves, and how that koala came out with the coloring, and of course all the sparkle of the sequins in the background. So thanks again for watching, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye!